إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستهديه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهدي الله فهو المهتدي ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما. قال الله تعالى في كتابه العزيز بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل إن تخفوا ما في صدوركم أو تبدوه يعلمه الله ويعلم ما في السماوات وما في الأرض والله على كل شيء قدير. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, all praise, glory and majesty belongs to Allah Azza wa Jal alone. And we ask Him to send His greatest peace and blessings upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and upon his family and his companions, and upon all the believers until the day of judgment. Ya Rabbil Alameen. Allah Azza wa Jal says in the Quran what means in English. Say, O Prophet, whether you conceal what is in your heart or reveal it, it is known to Allah. For He knows whatever is in the heavens and whatever is in the earth, and Allah is most capable of everything. One of the things that perhaps is the most mysterious element of our faith is this concept of an intention. An intention in of itself is perhaps the only thing that matters in an act. Something which carries all the reward, even though it has the almost most imperceptible aspect of an act. We know from the Prophet ﷺ's hadith that all actions are governed by this intention. And at the same time, we know that people have been rewarded and will be rewarded countless things, including Hajj, Umrah, charity, for things they've never done merely because they had an intention. So in this climate of COVID, and whilst we're all in the midst of a lockdown, I wanted to focus on this specific topic, and particularly upon a hadith that really brings to light both the importance of an intention and how to understand it in the context. Allah just says in this ayah that I recited that Allah knows what is in your hearts, that even if you were to conceal or reveal it, even if you could articulate it or you struggle to find the words of what to say, Allah knows exactly what you're thinking. And as an aside, one of the common things you hear is people wondering what's the best dua to make. What's the best phrasing or wording for you to be able to make a dua that is answered by Allah Azza wa Jal. Allah Azza wa Jal doesn't need your words and doesn't need the specificity of a phrase for Him to answer your prayers. But rather, what's in the heart and what you feel and who you ask is what matters. So Allah Azza wa Jal says in this ayah, if you were to reveal or to conceal your intention, if you were to reveal or conceal the act that you do, Allah Azza wa Jal knows everything in the heavens and the earth. Now the Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith, and this hadith will be the main focus of this subject, and the way I want to discuss this topic is how we can prepare our intentions for what is to come. Now the meaning of that will come to light later on, but for now focus on the content of this hadith and see what things you can derive from your understanding of what the Prophet ﷺ is saying in the context of this phrase. In a hadith in Bukhari, the Prophet ﷺ said, if I had gold equal to the mountain of Uhud, it would not please me that it should remain with me for more than 3 days, except an amount which I would use to repay my debts. Now when you hear this hadith, what you realize is the Prophet ﷺ is setting an intention. He's wishing for something or stating his intent to do something had he or if he is given a particular action. What we learn is a number of points about how the Prophet ﷺ approaches this subject and how we can take lessons from this in the current climate to prepare for what is to come. As we're stuck inside and we wonder what will happen when the lockdown is lifted, we should begin to prepare our intentions in the same way the Prophet ﷺ is preparing his intention with this. The first thing to note in the phrase of the Prophet ﷺ, he says, if I had a mountain of gold equal to the weight of Uhud, is that our intention shouldn't be small. Our intentions should be massive, as big as they can be. Something that perhaps is inconceivable to ordinary people, we should make that intention. Because what matters isn't what you actually end up doing. What matters is the sincerity with which you intended to do it. And if that opportunity is afforded to you, do you fulfill the thing you said you would do? The Prophet ﷺ, if you can imagine a mountain, and imagine how valuable a single kilogram of gold would be, he's not wishing for millions or billions or even trillions. He's probably asking for numbers beyond capability, beyond imagination. And his intention in that statement will be rewarded, because who's more sincere than the Prophet ﷺ? Who gave more than the Prophet ﷺ when the time came? In the time of Hunayn, when unimaginable wealth came to the Muslims, he was giving to such an extent people thought, give, for this is a man who gives fearing not poverty. So the first thing we could take, and the most important thing we can take, is that whilst we are in this moment of lockdown, whilst we're in this moment where we wish and we begin to plan ahead of what's going to come if things are eased up, is start to think big. Think massive. Think about the biggest thing you could possibly do. And don't go too low. Don't under aim or under fire. Because your intention is the thing you'll be rewarded for. And even if that thing can't be fulfilled, Allah will reward you anyway. The second, and perhaps one of the most interesting points, is the specific thing the Prophet ﷺ mentioned. Now, on the face of it, if I said to you, here is £1 billion, you'd be like, yeah, I'll give it to charity, I'll do this, I'll do that. But how much have you actually thought of the detail? The Prophet ﷺ is saying, if I receive a mountain of gold, I would distribute this within 3 days. It wouldn't stay with me for 3 days. Now let's consider what that means. A mountain of gold is a physical object. There's a humongous pile to distribute to people. He has to work out how to transport that to different people. He has to work out who he's going to give it to and what criteria he's going to give it with. He's going to work out the specific type of people and causes in which he's going to give it to, and what's the most worthy versus others, and how much he's going to allocate. All of this added to the fact that he's giving physical currency and not simply an intangible click of a button or a donation, makes you appreciate just how detailed the Prophet ﷺ was given. He gave a specific number. Now, of course, what that gives an insight into the mind of the Prophet ﷺ is that he's planning ahead. He's not just merely intending, but he's making it so real that he's almost thought through exactly how he would like to do it. He's made an intention that's so sincere, and he's followed through with the plan that if he was ever placed in this position, he'd know exactly what to do. So let's come back to ourselves. When we think of an intention, do we think of this merely as, yeah, I'll intend to go for Hajj? Or have we begun to set about a plan in which we will try and action this intention? When we make an intention to try and learn more Quran, it's a noble thing, and every one of you listening to this today should make an intention that you become a Hafiz of Quran. Because that single intention of you becoming Hafiz, if you were to die on that intention with the pursuant of trying to become a Hafiz, Allah will write you as a Hafiz on the Day of Judgment, and you will attain the same reward. But an intention isn't simply making that intention, it's trying to action it in a real way. It's trying to figure out a path for you to reach from where you are to where you become. And even if that opportunity isn't afforded to you yet, because you've planned for it and because you've thought ahead, when that opportunity comes, you're prepared. Now we'll go through some specifics and practical tips later on in the khutbah. But what we want to consider in this moment is when you are making your intentions, think big. But at the same time, think practical. Think, how would you do things? And if this opportunity was given to you, what would you do? We all wish, perhaps, We don't all wish, I don't know, but perhaps we all at least considered if we were in the same position as Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos or people who have this immense wealth, how would we act differently to what they're acting? What would we do and where would we spend if we were in their position? As a little homework for you to do, start making a list. Think about how and what I would allocate money to where. After the first million, it gets quite confusing. Where would I give it? Only so much can go to just feeding the poor. You have to begin to think of a strategy. You have to begin to think of an allocation, a system in which you can account for the donation that you've given. And the third thing we notice from this hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and a reminder of these beautiful words that he said, he says, if I was given gold equal to the mountain of Uhud, it would not please me that it should remain with me for more than 3 days, except an amount which I would keep for repaying debts. The third thing, and I think this is perhaps incredibly insightful of the Prophet ﷺ, is that he hasn't forgotten of his own self-care and needs. Now, this isn't to indulge or to rise above what's required and to entertain yourself. But it's important in any plan that you consider the impact it will have on yourself and the individual steps that you, as a Muslim, when you're performing these things, is it going to be something you can maintain for your own self-care? As an example, we're in Ramadan, this beautiful, beautiful month. And each of us are praying lots of Taraweeh, we're reading lots of Quran. We're doing things perhaps pushing us to the limits, and that's a good thing. But is it sustainable? Is it something that we can actually continue post-Ramadan? That we can maintain our energy levels, that we can maintain our systems. Now, I speak and teach a lot of young people, and it seems many families, from having spoken to them, have almost shifted their life pattern. They stay awake till 4 a.m. and then they wake up at 11, 12. Now, whilst that works for Ramadan, it might not be sustainable for the long term. And it's important to begin thinking how you can fit into this noble intention, to this lofty plan. Are you going to burn out? And that's a very real thing that many people face. One of the things that I thought of is this Ramadan is probably the only Ramadan where we're afforded the opportunity to pray at home Taraweeh. We've established this family habit of coming together and praying in the evenings, extra prayers where we read through the Quran. Make an intention today that you're going to try and continue that habit. Now, of course, the lofty intention is that we can pray all night and do all these things, but the realistic intention and the intention which accounts for our own self-need is planning for your all circumstances. Make an intention to pray 2 rak'ahs every night, as a family, post-Isha, in the evening where you can wake up and pray together. Make an intention that once a week you can wake up and continue your fasts. Have suhoor together. Make it a family thing, just like you've established this Ramadan. So whilst the intention has to be lofty and it should be very strategic, it also has to account for the very real concerns that you have for yourself. Now, these are just 3 insights that we receive and we understand from the hadith of our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. An insight we receive into how his mind operated and how he was revealed to speak, because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam never spoke from anything except that it was revelation from Allah Azza wa Jalla. So in this post-COVID world, how should we plan for our intention? And what should we be thinking? Well, before we get into the details of the practical steps, let's run through a few important basics. The first and most important thing for you to understand is that Allah Azza wa Jal is as you think of Him. Allah Azza says in a hadith Qudsi, He says, I am as my servant thinks of me. So let him think of me as he wishes. If he remembers me in his heart, I remember him. And if he remembers me in an assembly, in a gathering, I remember him in a gathering even greater than that gathering. And if he draws near to me by a palm, I draw near to him by a cubit. If he comes by a cubit, then I come by the space covered by 2 hands. And if he comes walking to me, I come running to him. Now this famous hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, upon the words of Allah Azza wa Jal, is saying that the most important thing for us to consider is what we think of Allah. When we make an intention, you have to remove any barriers you have of Allah's generosity, of His mercy, and what exactly He can give to you. Allah has no bounds. Allah can literally fulfill everything you want and more, and not lose a single thing from His dominion. So the most important step you have to make in an intention is you have to believe you can do it. You have to remove mental barriers that you have and allow yourself to believe that with Allah anything is possible. To secularists and Orientalists who studied the life of the Prophet ﷺ, everything about his situation seemed impossible. He was an orphan in the middle of a desert, born to what seemingly is land that nobody even ventured to conquer because it was so uninhabitable. And from there he built the greatest generation which brought to millions of people this beautiful faith of Islam. And none could be more sincere and more pure in their intention than the Prophet ﷺ. Allah turned the whole world in order to raise the name of our beloved Prophet Muhammad ﷺ because of the sincerity with which he acted. So the first thing we take from this hadith is that we have to understand that it's us that's the barrier. You put your barrier as high as you can. Try and make yourself as lofty as your intention can be, and Allah will fulfill that ambition. The second is that Allah is eager to come to you. He's waiting for you to turn. And it's never too late. Even if you take the smallest of steps, Allah takes a far bigger step. The more you do, the more Allah reciprocates. And it's important to understand that Allah loves us. He wants us to do well. He's waiting for an opportunity for Him to forgive us, for Him to turn and shower us with His mercy. So make your intention lofty and great and as big as it can be, because Allah has no bounds in what He can give. The second important aspect to understand from an intention is that the practicalities are important. Life is never straightforward. And our intention isn't a single point, but rather it's what we call a flow. It's something that's persistently changing and evolving, and something we have to continually revisit and ensure that it hasn't changed. Some people may start off being very sincere in their work. Whether you started a new job, or you sincerely applying for something to get this halal income to feed your family. With time, when your boss does something to spite you, or you fall out with a colleague, or there's an immense amount of pressure to do something, you feel burnt out. Renew your intention. Check, what is it I'm still doing this for? And has that changed at all? Our intention, in accordance with this, is something that the Prophet ﷺ advised us to constantly change. And as life stumbles come along, how will you evolve and will you continue to persist? This is a lesson that I saw consistently in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. We all know of the hijrah, the migration he took from Mecca to Medina. But did you know that the Prophet ﷺ approached over 42 different tribes before he eventually agreed to go to Yathrib? He was rejected and rejected and rejected. Imagine that level of desperation that the Muslims were facing at that time. People being tortured. The Prophet was seeing people being killed in front of him. And after going to so many people, each rejection, how painful that must have felt. But his sincerity and his knowledge that Allah will give this victory led to perhaps one of the most pivotal moments of human history, such that our calendars are marked by that event. The hijrah, the movement of the Prophet ﷺ from Mecca to Medina. Similarly, you see things like the Battle of Yarmouk, where Khalid ibn Walid and other people led and defended against a battle of the Romans and Byzantines, who came mounting a massive army to destroy the Muslims who just entered into Syria. You'll see in that battle things don't go to plan. In fact, things go very badly and difficult, and things almost feel like they're defeated. But the intention, this persistence that you have, has to remain there, because Allah's testing just how sincere you are. The third thing to note is that intentions in and of themselves, as well as changing, there's something which will be tested. They will be put to the fire by Allah to see, is this something that you will stick to when push comes to shove? But at the same time, and this is very important to note, that the process isn't a question of success or failure. The process is a question of evolution, of changing and evolving as circumstances and situations improve. If you fail the first time, if you try to become a hafiz, and after a week you've kind of dropped the Quran by the side, don't worry, because just start again. Just pick it up and continue. Learn from your mistakes and get better. And actually, psychologists have looked into this and discussed it as the negativity bias. The idea that just because you give up for example, someone dieting, after 3 weeks of dieting, they have a chocolate bar. And they think, oh, the world is over, there's no point dieting anymore, I'm going to give it all up. But look at the positives. Look at the fact you've continued for 3 weeks. And yes, this barrier has come along, but overcome it. Come through it. I learned from my own work with the Quran Club and the community work that we do, that inevitably there will be a barrier. There will be some blockage that stops you in your tracks, that you've planned for everything and this thing almost feels like it's tearing you apart. Learn to overcome it and keep sincere in your intention, as Allah Azza wa Jal will help you through it. And finally, know that the intention is the most important aspect of any act you do. So it's important to continue revisiting it. The Prophet ﷺ said, if a person intends to do something and does it, then he receives tenfold the reward or many multiples more. If a person intends to do a reward and does not do it, then they are still rewarded as if they had done it. And similarly, and perhaps most mysteriously, if a person intends to do a bad thing, but then changes their mind, changes their intention, they're rewarded. And if a person intends to do a bad thing and then performs it, that's the only time in which we're written down as a sin. And this insight perhaps opens up the broadest insight into how the intentions work. The idea that we can stumble, we can make mistakes, but if we change the way we think about things, if we change what we intended to do, even if we'd intended to do something very bad, if we turn to Allah Azza wa Jal, that actually becomes written for us as a good deed. Allah Azza wa Jal has placed the weight of the intention so heavy. And for now, whilst we're in our homes and we have time to contemplate and think, now's the time to begin to plan. To plan to be like the Prophet ﷺ, who, had he been given a mountain of gold, he can distribute it all within 3 days. So what practical lessons can we take from this? And how, following this talk, can we begin to apply this intention and begin to plan and prepare our intention for when we leave this time of lockdown? The first, and perhaps most important, is think big. Begin to plan the many things that you can begin to do, the many steps and ideas of projects that you want to do going forward. Now, these things are not weighted by necessarily their scale, but they're weighted by the sincerity in which you place on them. Some ideas of things that you can do when this lockdown is lifted. Make the intention from now that when this lockdown is lifted, we're going to make more of a commitment to pray in the mosque. At the moment, our masjids are closed and we feel heartbroken at our inability to pray Friday prayer, to pray our 5 daily prayers within the masjid. Make the intention that if this lockdown is lifted, I can begin to pray in the masjid. Make the intention that you can connect with family ties. Be appreciative of the social gatherings you have with your cousins and your uncles and the things that we miss so dearly. Be grateful for when they come back to you, because this is something that we've missed and understood the value of. Make intention to go on Hajj, to go on Umrah, and begin to lay the plans of how you can begin to do that. Or more broadly, traveling the world in order for you to see the wonders of Allah's creation and to appreciate just how majestic and how beautiful it is. Make an intention to volunteer, to do some community work. Begin to plan and think about the details and think lofty in terms of how you can achieve this. One of the things that I was given an advice on, and this advice is very, very useful for myself and for every one of us, is pick something that you have a particular passion for. in which the world can do with trying to fix it, trying to improve it. Whether it be something that's related to finance, and you have a specialism in finance from your degree or the job that you work in, or it's something to do with the environment, or the community, or working with our youth. Start planning how you would change the situation if you were given the reins. If you were given, like the Prophet ﷺ was given, a mountain of gold, what would you do if you were in that situation? What strategy would you place? We need people who can begin to think very, very lofty, very, very high. We're always looking at the world and thinking, if only we had the Prophet ﷺ in this day and age. If only we had someone like Sayyidina Umar in this day and age. But each of those people have gone. And now the time is ours for us to rise and begin to plan. So pick something from a list of issues that I've listed, things in society which we could do with trying to fix, and think big. Think about how we can create an Islamic finance system that works in the way that we ethically aspire it to be. Think about how we can work within politics to begin to influence and change things for the better of humanity. Think about the environment and the imminent disaster that's facing us, and how we can begin to implement improvements to the world around us. Yes, these tasks seem impossible, just as though the task of distributing a mountain, it's so impossible, people use it as a phrase, you have to move a mountain. But the Prophet ﷺ has already planned and thought through how he would go about distributing this within 3 days. Begin to plan how and what you would go about doing. The second, after thinking big, is begin to be practical. Begin to set about steps that you can begin to do in order to implement this change. What things are you able to do from now to begin to plan and to begin to put into motion actions that when this lockdown is lifted, you can begin to do that? Now it's important in the list I've given not to assume one or the other, but something small, such as praying in the masjid, can be very lofty. I mentioned in a previous khutbah about our beloved Bilal radiallahu anhu, and how amongst all the immense and amazing things he did, the thing which changed him, the thing which guaranteed him paradise, was the fact that when he prays 2 rak'ahs, or rather when he loses his wudu, he always renews his wudu, and when he renews his wudu, he prays 2 rak'ahs. It's the small things that make the big things. And it's important in our practical steps, we think of the individual care that we need to do and the improvements we need to do in changing ourselves as we go along this path of improvement. And then finally, we should layer our intentions. Begin thinking of all the different things and ways in which an action that you do can be benefited in many different ways. We once had a martial arts session in our youth group, and I asked our attendees, what's the intention for which you're coming here? Now the obvious thing is they're coming to learn to practice martial arts and become strong and learn self-defense. But what we did was we undertook a task of layering the intention, thinking of all the different reasons we could add on to that in order for the act that we're doing to increase multiples in its value. So for example, you could make the intention that you're copying the Prophet ﷺ in it being a sunnah for us to pursue. You could make the intention that you're trying to get healthy in order for you to have a longer life of obedience of Allah Azza wa Jal. You can make the intention that you're getting stronger so that you can defend our Muslims and protect those vulnerable around us. You can make the intention that you're there to meet friends, because the Prophet ﷺ said, whenever 2 people meet and depart for the sake of Allah, Allah Azza wa Jal will shade them on the day there's no shade except His shade. You can make the intention of coming to the house of Allah Azza wa Jal, being in the place of a masjid, a place which for every moment that you're in it is a time of worship. You can make the intention of learning self-defense. You can make the intention of waiting for salah. You can make the intention. The more things you layer, the more valuable your action becomes. So whilst we're thinking big, and whilst we're thinking practical, try and think in ways that allow you to multiply the acts that you're doing. And make sure you pay attention to your intention in every act that you're doing. Because a simple moment of thinking through each of the different reasons you're performing the act that you're performing will enable you to make a single act of fasting or prayer or charity become far greater and loftier on the scales of Allah Azza wa Jal. May Allah allow us to be like our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. May He give us lofty intentions and aspirations and allow us and empower us to fulfill it in order for us to be able to bring beautiful change to this world after this lockdown is taken away. Make the intention that you can begin planning and writing a list of things. And if you're listening to this khutbah, share them with us. Let us know what things you aspire to do and what intentions you aspire to reach after this lockdown is lifted. Think of the small things, think of the big things, and write them down and make a plan of action of how you will go about achieving them. And remember, be practical and always make sure you don't burn out and think about self-care. Jazakallah khair. Thank you for listening. Of course, unfortunately, this is not a Jum'ah Salah, so it doesn't count as a khutbah which you need to pray 2 rak'ahs. So you need to stand up and pray your 4 rak'ahs of Salat al-Duhr as a family. Pray together because the prayer together counts 27 times more than a prayer individually. And of course, please remember us in your du'as, inshaAllah. One of the things at the Quran Club, we're trying to reach a target of raising £100,000 for charity. We're passing this all on to charity. This is just merely a good deed we're hoping to achieve, inshaAllah. We've created facilities on there where you can guarantee Laylatul Qadr by giving money every single night of the last 10 nights automatically on our app. And we've also created things like the Quran Club Quiz, the Quran Club Challenge, because we want to give you value. We want to make things easy for you this Ramadan and make this Ramadan spiritually fulfilling in a time that we don't have access to our masjid and the community that we usually have. Please make dua for their success, support them where you can, and inshallah sign up your children to the challenge and the other activities. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.